Marcus wiped the grease from his hands with a dirty rag, the familiar smell of engine oil filling his nostrils. The mining facility's massive excavation machines surrounded him like sleeping metal giants in the dim workshop. At 28, he had spent the last 6 years keeping these beasts running, crawling through their mechanical guts to fix whatever broke down in the harsh mountain terrain. The Corvin Mining Company had built their operation deep in the Drakmore Mountains, where precious metals lay buried beneath layers of ancient rock. The pay was good, but the isolation was brutal. The nearest town was 3 days' journey by transport truck, and the mountain winds carried strange sounds that made even the toughest miners nervous. Marcus had always been different from the other workers. While they spent their free time drinking synthetic alcohol and gambling their wages away, he preferred to read technical manuals and tinker with spare parts. His supervisor, Garrett Voss, called him a loner. The other miners whispered that he was too smart for his own good. That morning started like any other. Marcus received a work order to check the primary excavator's hydraulic system. The machine had been acting up for days, its massive arm jerking unpredictably while digging. He gathered his tools and headed to the excavation site, a massive crater carved in the mountainside where the company extracted rare earth elements. The excavator sat silent at the bottom of the pit, its yellow paint faded and scratched from years of hard work. Marcus climbed into the operator's cabin and ran through the diagnostic sequence. Everything seemed normal until he noticed something odd in the hydraulic fluid readings. The pressure was fluctuating in a pattern that made no sense. He decided to inspect the hydraulic lines manually. Crawling beneath the massive machine, Marcus followed the steel tubes that carried pressurized fluid to the excavator's joints. The mountain air was cold, and his breath formed small clouds as he worked his way deeper under the machine. That's when he found it. Hidden among the legitimate hydraulic lines was something that didn't belong. A small device, no bigger than his fist, attached to the main hydraulic feed. Marcus had never seen anything like it before, but his engineering mind quickly understood what he was looking at. Someone had installed a sabotage device designed to cause catastrophic hydraulic failure. His heart began to race. If this device activated while someone was operating the excavator, the results would be deadly. The machine could collapse, crushing whoever was inside the cabin. But who would want to sabotage mining equipment? And why? Marcus carefully photographed the device with his personal communicator, making sure to capture every detail. He needed to report this immediately. Someone's life was in danger, and the company needed to know they had a saboteur among their workers. He climbed out from under the excavator and activated his radio to contact the surface control room. But before he could speak, a hand grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. 3 men stood behind him, their faces grim beneath their mining helmets. Marcus recognized them immediately. Garrett Voss, his supervisor, along with 2 security guards named Pike and Reynolds. "Find something interesting down there, Marcus?" Garrett's voice was cold, completely different from his usual gruff but friendly tone. Marcus held up his communicator, showing them the photographs. "Someone's trying to kill people. There's a sabotage device on the hydraulic system. We need to shut down operations and investigate." The 3 men exchanged glances, and Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Something was very wrong here. "That's unfortunate," Garrett said slowly. "We really hoped you wouldn't find that." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His supervisor, the man who had trained him and trusted him with the most complex repairs, was part of whatever was happening here. The sabotage wasn't the work of some unknown enemy. It was an inside job. "Why?" Marcus managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Garrett pulled off his helmet, revealing graying hair and tired eyes. "Because some things are more important than mining operations, boy. This mountain has secrets that need to stay buried." Pike stepped forward, his hand moving to the stunner on his belt. "The kid's seen too much. We can't let him report this." Marcus's mind raced. He was trapped at the bottom of a mining pit with 3 men who were willing to commit murder to protect their secret. His radio was in his hand, but the nearest security station was half a mile away. Even if he could call for help, who could he trust? What secrets? Marcus demanded, backing away from the three men. What's so important that you'd kill for it? Reynolds, the younger of the two security guards, looked uncomfortable. Maybe we should just transfer him to another facility. He doesn't have to die. Garrett shook his head. He's too smart. Give him a week, and he'll figure out what we're really mining here. The contract is too important to risk. Contract. Marcus filed that word away. This wasn't just about sabotage. Corvin Mining was involved in something bigger, something that required keeping certain discoveries secret. Run, a voice in his head urged, but there was nowhere to go. The pit walls were too steep to climb without equipment, and the only exit was a narrow ramp that led back to the surface. The three men stood between him and that ramp. Pike drew his stunner, the weapon humming as it charged. Sorry, kid. Nothing personal. Marcus dove to his left as the stunner fired, the energy bolt scorching the ground where he had been standing. He rolled behind the excavator's massive tracks, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it over the mountain wind. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Garrett called out. We're not monsters. The stunner will just knock you unconscious. But Marcus knew better. If they were willing to kill him to protect their secret, they wouldn't hesitate to make his death look like an accident. Maybe the excavator would malfunction and crush him. Maybe he would fall into one of the deep mining shafts. There were plenty of ways to die in a mining operation. He pulled out his communicator and tried to send a message to the surface, but the device showed no signal. They must have jammed communications somehow. He was completely cut off from help. The sound of footsteps echoed off the pit walls as the three men spread out, trying to surround his position. Marcus crawled along the base of the excavator, staying low and quiet. His only advantage was knowing the machine better than they did. He reached the maintenance panel on the excavator's side and quickly opened it. Inside were the manual controls for the hydraulic system. If he could activate the machine without power, maybe he could create enough distraction to escape. Marcus found the emergency hydraulic release and pulled the lever. Pressurized fluid hissed from the lines, creating a cloud of mist that would provide some cover. But the sound also revealed his position. There! Pike shouted, and another stunner bolt crashed into the metal beside Marcus's head. He ran along the base of the pit wall, looking for anything he could use as cover or a weapon. Mining equipment was scattered around the excavation site, but nothing that would help him against three armed men. Then he saw it. A maintenance shaft built into the pit wall, probably used for accessing underground utilities. The opening was small, barely wide enough for a person, and covered with a metal grate. But it might lead somewhere the men couldn't follow. Marcus sprinted toward the shaft as stunner fire erupted behind him. The energy bolts lit up the pit like lightning, sending sparks flying from the metal equipment. His legs burned as he pushed himself harder than ever before. He reached the shaft and grabbed the metal grate. It was locked, but years of working with tools had made his hand strong. He twisted and pulled until the metal bent enough for him to squeeze through. The shaft was dark and narrow, barely wide enough for his shoulders. Marcus crawled forward on his hands and knees, feeling his way through the blackness. Behind him, he could hear the three men arguing about whether to follow. He's trapped in there, Pike said. We could just wait for him to come out. No, replied. We need to finish this now. The morning shift starts in 2 hours. The shaft angled downward, leading deeper into the mountain. Marcus had no idea where it led, but anywhere was better than the pit. His hands scraped against rough stone as he crawled forward, feeling for obstacles in the darkness. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the shaft opened into a larger tunnel. Marcus emerged into a space tall enough to stand, though he couldn't see anything in the absolute darkness. The air smelled different here, older somehow, with a metallic tang that reminded him of blood. He activated the emergency light on his communicator, creating a small bubble of illumination around him. The tunnel stretched in both directions, carved for natural rock but clearly artificial. Someone had built this passage long ago, though it didn't match the construction style of the modern mining facility. Marcus chose a direction at random and began walking. The tunnel sloped steadily downward, leading him deeper into the mountain's heart. Strange symbols were carved into the walls at regular intervals, depicting creatures and scenes he didn't recognize. Whatever this place was, it predated the mining operation by centuries, maybe millennia. The temperature grew warmer as he descended, which didn't make sense. Underground spaces were usually cold, especially this high in the mountains. But the air around him felt almost tropical, heavy with humidity and strange scents. After walking for nearly an hour, Marcus began to hear something ahead. A rhythmic sound, almost like breathing, echoed through the tunnel. He slowed his pace and dimmed his light, suddenly aware that he might not be alone in these passages. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern that took his breath away. His small light couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls, but he could see enough to know he had discovered something incredible. The cavern was filled with mining equipment, but not the modern machines he was familiar with. These were older, more advanced, built with technology that seemed impossible. Crystalline structures grew from the cavern floor like trees, pulsing with their own inner light. The walls were covered with more of the strange symbols, but these were different. They seemed to move and shift in the corner of his vision, as if they were alive. And then he saw the eggs. Dozens of them, each one the size of a person, arranged in careful rows across the cavern floor. They were translucent, allowing him to see shadowy shapes moving inside. Marcus approached one of the eggs cautiously, his scientific curiosity overcoming his fear. The creature inside was unmistakably reptilian, but larger than any lizard he had ever seen. Its head was the size of his torso, with what looked like small horns beginning to form along its skull. Wings were folded against its body, delicate membranes that would someday carry it through the sky. Dragons. The eggs contained baby dragons. Marcus staggered backward, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Dragons were myths, stories told to children. They didn't exist in the real world. But the evidence was right in front of him, impossible to deny. The breathing sound grew louder, and Marcus realized it wasn't coming from the eggs. Something much larger was moving in the shadows at the far end of the cavern. He raised his light and immediately wished he hadn't. A fully grown dragon lay coiled among the crystalline structures, its scales reflecting the light like polished metal. The creature was massive, easily 50 feet long, with wings that could have covered a small building. Its eyes were closed, but its chest rose and fell with the rhythm he had been hearing. It was sleeping, but for how long? Marcus understood now why Corvin Mining was willing to kill to keep their secret. They weren't just extracting metals from the mountain. They had discovered a dragon's nesting site, perhaps the last one on Earth. The value of such a discovery would be incalculable, not just in money but in power. But they were also playing with forces beyond their understanding. Dragons weren't just large animals. Every legend, every story spoke of them as intelligent, magical beings capable of incredible destruction. If the mother dragon discovered what the humans were doing to her territory, her eggs, a new sound echoed through the cavern, voices growing closer. The three men had followed him into the tunnels, and they were bringing friends. Marcus counted at least 6 different voices, all of them armed if the sound of equipment was any indication. He looked around desperately for another way out, but the cavern seemed to have only one entrance. Unless he could climb the walls or hide among the crystalline structures, he was trapped. The voices grew louder. Spread out. Check every corner. He has to be in here somewhere. Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life, however long that might be. He couldn't let them find him, and he couldn't let them continue their exploitation of this place. The dragon eggs deserved protection, even if it cost him everything. He picked up a loose rock from the cavern floor and threw it as hard as he could at one of the crystalline structures. The impact rang through the cavern like a bell, sending harmonic vibrations through every crystal in the chamber. The mother dragon's eyes snapped open, revealing pupils that glowed like molten gold in the darkness. She raised her massive head and turned toward the sound, her gaze sweeping across the cavern until it fixed on the small human standing among her eggs. For a moment that lasted forever, Marcus and the dragon stared at each other across an impossible gulf of species and understanding. He could see intelligence in those golden eyes, an ancient wisdom that made him feel like an insect in comparison. Then she opened her mouth and roared. The sound was like nothing Marcus had ever experienced. It wasn't just noise. It was a physical force that knocked him to his knees and sent the crystalline structures ringing like a massive orchestra. The very air seemed to vibrate with power and fury. The men in the tunnel stopped talking. In the sudden silence that followed the dragon's roar, Marcus could hear them running, their footsteps echoing as they fled back the way they had come. But it was too late for him to escape. The dragon was rising, her massive body uncoiling like a living mountain. Her wings spread wide, blocking out the cavern's ceiling, and her eyes never left his face. Marcus closed his eyes and waited for the end. He had betrayed his own species to protect creatures he didn't understand, and now he would pay the price. At least the dragon eggs would be safe. At least the secret would die with him. But the killing blow never came. When Marcus opened his eyes, the dragon was standing directly in front of him, her head lowered until they were face to face. This close, he could see every detail of her scales, each one a work of art that captured and reflected light in impossible ways. Her breath was warm against his skin, carrying scents of sulfur and ancient places. She studied him with those golden eyes, and Marcus had the strangest feeling that she was reading his thoughts, understanding his intentions in a way no human ever could. Slowly, carefully, she extended one massive claw and gently touched his forehead. Images flooded his mind. He saw the mountain as it had been thousands of years ago, when dragons ruled the skies and humans were nothing more than primitive tribes scratching out a living in the valleys below. He saw the first mining operations, the gradual encroachment of human technology into spaces that had been sacred for millennia. And he saw what Corvin Mining really intended to do with their discovery. The dragons weren't just being studied. They were being harvested. The company planned to extract genetic material from the eggs to create weapons and technologies that would make them the most powerful corporation on Earth. The vision ended, and Marcus found himself back in the cavern, tears streaming down his face. The dragon withdrew her claw and made a sound deep in her throat, almost like a purr. She understood what he had done and why. But understanding didn't mean forgiveness. The dragon turned away from him and moved toward the tunnel entrance. Her massive body filled the passage completely, sealing it off from the outside world. Whatever her intentions, Marcus was now trapped in the cavern with her and her unhatched children. She settled back into her resting position among the crystalline structures, but her eyes remained open, watching him, waiting to see what he would do next. Marcus looked around the cavern, taking in the alien beauty of the place. The dragon eggs pulsed with their own inner light, and the crystals sang softly in harmonies that touched something deep in his soul. This was a place of power and mystery, far removed from the mechanical world he had known. He was no longer Marcus the mechanic. He was something else now, though he didn't yet know what. The only thing he knew for certain was that his old life was over. Whether the dragon intended to kill him, keep him prisoner, or it was something else entirely, he would never see the surface world again. The thought should have terrified him, but instead he felt an odd sense of peace. For the first time in his life, he was somewhere he truly belonged. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus first entered the dragon's cavern, though time seemed to flow differently in the depths of the mountain. The crystals provided enough light to distinguish between day and night, pulsing brighter during what he assumed were daylight hours, and dimming to a soft glow when darkness fell on the surface world. The dragon, whom he had begun to think of as Seraphina, had not spoken to him again since that first mind touch. But She watched him constantly, her golden eyes tracking his every movement as he explored the vast chamber that had become his new home. Marcus had discovered that the cavern was much larger than he first realized. Side passages led to smaller chambers filled with ancient artifacts and strange machinery that seemed to blend magic and technology in ways his engineering mind couldn't comprehend. Some rooms contained what looked like libraries, with books written in the same flowing script he had seen carved into the walls. Others held workshops where unknown craftsmen had created tools and weapons from materials he couldn't identify. But it was the nursery that fascinated him most. The dragon eggs were arranged in perfect spirals across the chamber floor, each one carefully positioned to receive optimal warmth from the thermal vents that honeycombed the mountain's interior. Marcus had counted 73 eggs in total, representing what might be the last generation of dragons on Earth. He had also discovered that he wasn't going to starve. The thermal vents produced more than just warmth. They also supported a complex ecosystem of plants and small animals that had evolved in the cavern's unique environment. Luminescent fungi provided both light and nutrition, while underground streams carried fresh water from mountain springs. It wasn't the most varied diet, but it was enough to survive. Seraphina seemed to approve of his presence among the eggs. She had not stopped him from examining them, though she watched carefully whenever he came close to the developing hatchlings. Through the translucent shells, Marcus could see that the young dragons were growing rapidly. Some of the larger eggs showed movement, as if the occupants were beginning to test their wings. On the 21st day of his captivity, everything changed. Marcus was sitting beside one of the larger eggs, sketching its development patterns in a notebook he had found in one of the ancient workshops. The dragon inside was particularly active, pressing against the shell walls as if trying to break free. Its movements had become more coordinated over the past few days, suggesting that hatching was imminent. A hairline crack appeared along the egg's surface, so thin he almost missed it. But as he watched, the crack grew longer, spreading across the shell in a spider web pattern. Something golden gleamed through the gaps. The baby dragon was trying to hatch. Marcus called out to Seraphina, forgetting for a moment that she couldn't understand human speech. But the great dragon was already moving, her massive form gliding across the cavern floor with surprising grace. She positioned herself beside the egg and began to hum, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate through Marcus's bones. The humming grew louder, and the other eggs began to respond. All across the cavern, shells that had been dormant for weeks suddenly came alive with movement. The hatching wasn't going to be a single event. All 73 dragons were going to emerge at once. Marcus backed away, giving Seraphina room to work. The great dragon's humming rose to a crescendo, and suddenly, the air filled with the sound of cracking shells. Golden light poured from dozens of eggs as their occupants finally broke free from their crystalline prisons. The first hatchling to fully emerge was no bigger than a house cat, but even in miniature, its draconic heritage was unmistakable. Scales that shifted color like oil on water covered its serpentine body, while wings that seemed too large for its frame fluttered experimentally. Its eyes were the same molten gold as its mother's, though they held a curious innocence that made Marcus's heart ache. More hatchlings followed, each one unique despite their shared parentage. Some emerged with scales of deep emerald, others with silver or bronze coloring. A few showed the beginning of the horned crest that would eventually crown their heads, while others had wing membranes marked with intricate patterns. But as beautiful as the newborns were, Marcus quickly realized they were also in danger. Several of the hatchlings seemed weak, struggling to break completely free from their shells. Others emerged successfully, but then collapsed too exhausted to move. Without help, some of them would die. Marcus looked at Seraphina, hoping she would tend to the struggling babies, but the great dragon seemed paralyzed by some internal conflict. She moved from egg to egg, humming frantically, but she made no move to physically help the hatchlings in distress. Understanding hit him like a thunderbolt. Seraphina was afraid to touch her own children. Her size and strength, so perfectly suited for protecting the eggs and fighting enemies, made her too dangerous to handle such delicate creatures. One careless movement of her massive claws could crush a baby dragon instantly. But Marcus was the perfect size. His human hands, so clumsy when compared to draconic power, were exactly what the situation required. Without conscious thought, Marcus moved toward the near struggling hatchling. The baby dragon was half emerged from its egg, but a piece of shell had gotten stuck around its neck like a collar. The creature was chirping frantically as it tried to breathe. Marcus gently worked his fingers under the shell fragment and carefully pried it away. The hatchling gasped and immediately filled its lungs with air, its tiny chest expanding and contracting rapidly. When it looked up at him with those impossibly ancient eyes, Marcus felt something shift in his chest. He moved to the next struggling hatchling and the next, working with the careful precision he had once applied to repairing delicate machinery. But this was different. Each life he saved felt like a piece of his soul being rewoven, connecting him to something larger and more important than himself. Seraphina watched his every movement, her massive head following him as he worked his way across the cavern floor. He could feel her presence in his mind, not intrusive like their first contact, but gentle and warm. She was sharing her gratitude and something else, something that felt almost like pride. As the hours passed, all 73 hatchlings successfully emerged from their eggs. Some were stronger than others, but all were alive and breathing. They huddled together in small groups, instinctively seeking warmth and comfort from their siblings. Their tiny chirps and calls filled the cavern with sounds of new life. But Marcus's work was far from over. Newborn dragons, he discovered, were hungry, very hungry. The hatchlings began searching for food, and Marcus realized he had no idea what baby dragons were supposed to eat. He looked around the cavern desperately, trying to remember if he had seen anything in the ancient texts that might provide guidance. Seraphina solved the problem in a way that both amazed and horrified him. She opened her massive jaws and produced a stream of what looked like liquid silver. The substance pooled on the cavern floor, steaming with its own heat. The hatchlings immediately swarmed toward it, lapping up the metallic substance with obvious relish. Dragon's milk, Marcus realized. Seraphina was feeding her children with some kind of alchemical substance produced by her own body. The process must have been incredibly draining, because the great dragon visibly sagged after producing enough to feed all 73 babies. Over the following days, Marcus established a routine that felt surprisingly natural. He helped Seraphina tend to the hatchlings, cleaning them when they made messes, settling disputes when they fought over food or territory, and making sure the weaker ones weren't bullied by their stronger siblings. The baby dragons seemed to accept him as part of their family unit. They climbed on him constantly, their tiny claws pricking through his clothes as they sought warmth and attention. Some of them even began to follow him around the cavern, chirping plaintively when he moved too far away. But it was his relationship with Seraphina that changed most dramatically. The great dragon began to communicate with him more frequently, touching his mind with images and emotions that gradually taught him to understand her thoughts. She showed him glimpses of dragon history, of the great wars that had driven her kind to the edge of extinction, of the sacred duty she bore as one of the last mothers of her species. She also began to teach him about the ancient technology that filled the cavern. The crystalline structures, he learned, were not just decorative. They were part of a vast network that drew power from the mountain's core and distributed it throughout the underground complex. The strange machines in the side chambers were tools for shaping reality itself, capable of manipulating matter and energy in ways human science couldn't duplicate. But most importantly, she taught him about the bond that was forming between them. Dragons, she explained, were not solitary creatures despite their reputation. They formed deep emotional connections with other beings, partnerships that could last for centuries. These bonds were rare and precious, usually formed only with other dragons. The fact that she was bonding with a human was unprecedented. Marcus felt the truth of it in his own heart. Every day he spent in the cavern, his connection to Seraphina and her children grew stronger. He began to dream in colors he had never seen before, to hear harmonics in the crystal song that human ears shouldn't have been able to detect. Sometimes he would touch one of the hatchlings and experience a brief flash of their simple thoughts and emotions. He was changing, becoming something new. Not quite human anymore, but not dragon either. Something in between. On the 40th day after the hatching, that transformation accelerated dramatically. Marcus woke to find Seraphina standing over him, her golden eyes bright with excitement. Without explanation, she touched his forehead with the tip of one claw and flooded his mind with visions. He saw the surface world as it appeared to dragon's senses, a tapestry of energy flows and magical currents invisible to human perception. He saw Corvin Mining's operations with new clarity, understanding for the first time the true scope of their damage to the mountain's spiritual ecosystem. But, most shocking of all, he saw other dragons. They were scattered across the world, hidden in remote places where human technology couldn't easily reach. Mountain peaks in the Himalayas, deep ocean trenches, the hearts of ancient forests, Arctic wastes. There weren't many, perhaps a few dozen at most, but they existed, and they were dying. Cut off from their sacred sites by human expansion, isolated from potential mates by geography and fear, the remaining dragons were slowly fading away. Within a generation, maybe two, they would be extinct, unless something changed. Seraphina's plan hit him like a physical blow. She intended to use the ancient technology in the cavern to reach out to the scattered survivors, to call them home to a place where they could rebuild their civilization. But the process would require enormous amounts of energy, more than the crystalline network could generate on its own. It would require sacrifice. Marcus saw what she was asking of him and understood why she had chosen a human for this bond. Dragons were too important to risk on such a venture. Their lives were measured in millennia, their knowledge irreplaceable. But humans lived brief, bright lives that could be spent in service of something greater. She wanted him to become a conduit for the calling, to channel the mountain's power through his own life force. The process would change him irrevocably, assuming it didn't kill him outright. But it might save an entire species. Marcus looked around the cavern at the 73 hatchlings who had become his children in every way that mattered. They were playing among the crystals, their scales catching the light as they learned to use their growing wings. Some of them had already begun to speak, their first words coming out as musical notes that made the chamber walls ring with harmony. They deserved a future. They deserved to know the sky and the wind, to learn the ancient songs and carry forward the wisdom of their kind. If his sacrifice could give them that chance, how could he refuse? But before he could agree to Seraphina's plan, new sounds echoed through the tunnel that led to the surface. Voices, human voices, getting closer by the minute. Corvin Mining had finally found them. Marcus grabbed his emergency communicator and activated its scanner function. The readout showed multiple heat signatures moving through the tunnel system, accompanied by what looked like heavy equipment. They weren't just coming to capture him anymore. They were mounting a full-scale assault on the dragon's lair. Seraphina's eyes flared with golden fire as she sensed the approaching threat. Her children were still too young to fly, too weak to fight, too innocent to understand the danger they faced. If the humans reached the nursery, it would be a slaughter. The great dragon began to glow with inner fire, preparing for battle. But Marcus knew that even she couldn't fight an entire mining operation while protecting 73 helpless hatchlings. They needed another solution. He looked at the crystalline network surrounding them, at the ancient machines humming with barely contained power, at the hatchlings who trusted him completely. An idea began to form in his mind, desperate and dangerous, but possibly their only chance. If Seraphina's calling could reach dragons across the world, maybe it could also reach something else, something closer and more immediately useful. The mountain itself had a kind of consciousness, he had learned. The thermal vents, the crystal formations, the underground streams, they were all part of a vast geological entity that had been dreaming beneath the earth for millions of years. Dragon magic had been slowly awakening it over the centuries, preparing it for the day when it might be needed. That day had come. Marcus placed his hands on the nearest crystal formation and opened his mind to the network. Power flowed through him like molten metal, burning away everything that was merely human and replacing it with something harder and brighter. He felt his consciousness expand, touching every part of the mountain's hidden structure. And in the depths of the earth, something ancient and massive began to stir. The approaching miners felt it first as a trembling in the rock beneath their feet. Then, the tunnel walls began to shift, passages closing behind them while new routes opened ahead, leading them away from the nursery and deeper into the mountain's maze-like interior. But Marcus's intervention came at a cost. The power flowing through him was more than his human body could handle. He felt his life force burning like a candle flame, bright and fierce but ultimately limited. Seraphina sensed his distress and moved to his side, pressing her massive head against his chest. Through their bond, she shared her own strength with him, dragon vitality flowing into human frailty. The exchange created something new, a hybrid consciousness that was neither fully dragon nor fully human. Together, they reached out through the crystalline network and sent their call into the world. Across the planet, in hidden lairs and forgotten sanctuaries, ancient heads lifted and golden eyes opened. The last dragons of Earth heard the summons and began the long journey home. But as powerful as their call was, it would take time for help to arrive. Days or weeks, depending on how far the other dragons had to travel. In the meantime, Marcus and Seraphina would have to protect the nursery alone. The mining team was still approaching, though more slowly now as the mountain itself worked against them. Marcus could sense their confusion and growing fear as familiar passages became alien landscapes and reliable equipment began to malfunction. But they kept coming, driven by greed and corporate pressure to claim the greatest prize in human history. Living dragons, dragon eggs, and access to magical technology that could reshape the world. They would not stop until they succeeded or died trying. Marcus felt Seraphina's resolve crystallize through their bond. She would fight to protect her children, no matter the cost. Her fire would burn hot enough to melt steel, her claws sharp enough to shred any weapon humans could bring against her. But Marcus had a different idea. Violence would only attract more attention, bring more miners and soldiers and scientists who wanted to exploit what they found. The cycle would never end as long as humans knew dragons existed. There had to be another way. A way to protect the hatchlings without destroying their enemies. A way to preserve the secret while ensuring the species' survival. As the power of the mountain flowed through him, Marcus began to see possibilities that no purely human mind could have conceived. The answer lay not in fighting the surface world, but in separating from it entirely. The mountain was vast, its roots extending deep into the planet's core. With enough power and the right applications of dragon magic, they could hollow out entire cities in the depths, create a new world where dragons could live and thrive without human interference. But such a transformation would require incredible amounts of energy, more than the crystal network could provide, more than even Seraphina could channel alone. It would require all 73 hatchlings to contribute their growing power, and it would require Marcus to serve as the focal point for forces that would certainly destroy his human body. He would die to save them, but his consciousness would live on as part of the mountain itself, a guardian spirit watching over the dragons for as long as the earth endured. Seraphina understood his plan the moment it formed in his mind. through their bond, she felt his determination and his acceptance of the price. She also felt something else, his love for her and the hatchlings, deeper than anything he had ever experienced as a purely human being. In the tunnels above, the mining team finally reached the entrance to the main cavern. Marcus could hear their voices echoing off the walls, excited and greedy as they prepared to claim their prize. Time had run out. The choice was now or never. Marcus looked into Seraphina's golden eyes one last time, seeing infinite depths of wisdom and sorrow and hope. She touched his forehead gently with the tip of one claw, sharing a final moment of perfect understanding. Then he opened himself completely to the power of the mountain and began the transformation that would save the dragons and end his human life forever. The power hit Marcus like a tsunami of liquid fire, coursing through every cell of his body and rewriting the very essence of what he was. His human nervous system, designed for the simple tasks of biological survival, struggled to contain energies that could reshape mountains and bend the laws of physics. But he held on, drawing strength from Seraphina's presence in his mind and from the innocent trust of 73 hatchlings who depended on him for their survival. As the mountain's consciousness flowed through him, he began to understand the true scope of what they were attempting. The transformation wasn't just about creating a hidden sanctuary. It was about fundamentally altering the relationship between the physical and spiritual worlds, opening doorways that had been closed since the dawn of human civilization. The dragons had once served as bridges between realms, their magic allowing communication with forces beyond mortal understanding. That ancient role was about to be restored, with Marcus as the living anchor point between worlds. Through the crystalline network, he reached out to every thermal vent, every underground stream, every deposit of rare minerals in the mountain's vast structure. The geological formations that had taken millions of years to develop suddenly became fluid, malleable, responsive to conscious will. The cavern began to expand. Rock flowed like water, creating new chambers and passages that spiraled deep into the Earth's core. The ceiling rose until it was lost in shadows, held aloft by pillars of living crystal that sang with harmonious frequencies. Underground rivers carved new channels, carrying thermal energy to every corner of the growing complex. But the most dramatic change was in the walls themselves. The ancient symbols that had been carved into the stone came alive, glowing with inner fire as they began to record the story unfolding around them. Future generations of dragons would read these living histories and understand the sacrifice that had made their sanctuary possible. The mining team reached the cavern entrance just as the transformation reached its peak. Their leader, a corporate executive named Harrison Webb, stopped dead in his tracks as he witnessed something that his rational mind couldn't process. The space before him defied every law of physics and engineering he understood. What should have been a simple cave had become a cathedral of impossible beauty, filled with creatures from legend and powered by forces that modern science couldn't explain. "Impossible," Webb whispered, his voice barely audible over the crystal song that filled the air. "Dragons aren't real. They can't be real." But the evidence was right in front of him. Seraphina stood in the center of the expanding cavern, her massive form wreathed in flames that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Around her, 73 baby dragons added their voices to the magical chorus, their tiny forms glowing with the same inner fire as their mother. And at the heart of it all stood Marcus, though he was no longer recognizable as the human mechanic who had stumbled into this ancient place. His body had become translucent, shot through with veins of gold and silver that pulsed in rhythm with the mountain's heartbeat. His eyes blazed with the same molten light as the dragons, and when he spoke, his words resonated with the authority of geological ages. "This place is protected," Marcus said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. "You have no power here. Webb raised the military-grade energy weapon his team had brought for dealing with any large animals they might encounter. The device hummed as it charged, its targeting system automatically locking onto what it perceived as the greatest threat. But when Webb pulled the trigger, the energy bolt simply vanished into the crystalline structures around them. The crystals absorbed the weapon's power and transformed it into more fuel for the ongoing transformation. "You don't understand," Webb said, backing toward the tunnel entrance. "Corvin Mining has contracts with a dozen governments. We have rights to everything in this mountain. You can't stop us from claiming what belongs to humanity." Marcus felt a moment of sadness for the executive's narrow vision. Webb could see only resources to be exploited, profit to be extracted, power to be wielded. He was blind to the miracle unfolding around him, deaf to the crystal song that spoke of harmony between species and respect for the ancient ways. "Humanity has already chosen its path," Marcus replied. "You have built a world of steel and plastic, smoke and noise. You have forgotten the older ways, the deeper truths. But the earth remembers and the dragons remember, and now they will have a place where memory can flourish again." The transformation was accelerating, fueled by the arrival of energy signatures from across the planet. Marcus could sense them through the expanding network. Ancient dragons responding to the call, leaving their hidden refuges and beginning the long journey home. But he could also sense something else. Military satellites repositioning overhead. Government task forces being assembled. Corporate interests mobilizing resources for a full-scale assault on the mountain. Humanity's response to the discovery of dragons was exactly what he had feared. They would try to capture, study, exploit, and ultimately destroy what they found here. The species that had given birth to every legend of wisdom and power would become laboratory specimens and weapons of war, unless they were completely hidden from the surface world. Marcus reached deeper into the mountain structure, tapping into thermal vents that connected to the planet's molten core. The power available was virtually unlimited, but channeling it required sacrifice. He felt his human consciousness beginning to fragment, pieces of his identity dissolving into the larger pattern of forces he was manipulating. But Serafina was there to catch the pieces, holding them together through the strength of their bond. Through her ancient wisdom, she showed him how to surrender his humanity without losing himself entirely. He could become something new, something that had never existed before, a fusion of human ingenuity and draconic power. The process was agonizing and beautiful at the same time. Marcus felt his body dissolving into pure energy, but his awareness expanded to encompass the entire mountain complex. He became the guardian spirit he had envisioned, conscious and protective, but no longer limited by biological constraints. Webb and his team fled as the cavern's transformation reached its climax. The tunnel entrance sealed itself behind them, leaving no trace that it had ever existed. When they emerged on the surface, they found that their equipment registered no unusual readings from the mountain's interior. The dragon sanctuary had been placed slightly out of phase with normal reality, existing in the same space but on a different dimensional frequency. To human instruments, the mountain appeared completely solid and unremarkable. But from the inside, the sanctuary was a wonder that surpassed every legend ever told about dragon lairs. The main cavern had become a vast city, with crystal spires reaching toward a ceiling that sparkled like stars. Underground lakes reflected the light from bioluminescent plants that had never known sunlight. Gardens of impossible beauty flourished in chambers where thermal vents created perfect growing conditions for species that existed nowhere else on Earth. And everywhere there was music. The crystal formations sang in harmonies that touched the soul, while the wind through the tunnels carried melodies that spoke of ancient times and future possibilities. The 73 hatchlings explored their new home with wonder and delight, their tiny forms darting through passages designed specifically for young dragons to learn and grow. They would never know the fear of hiding from humans or the sorrow of isolation from their own kind. Seraphina established her throne in the highest spire, where she could watch over every part of the sanctuary while maintaining communication with the outside world. Through the crystal network, she monitored human activities on the surface, ensuring that the secret remained protected. But her greatest joy was in watching her children grow and learn. Under Marcus's guidance, they began to develop abilities that previous generations had nearly lost. They learned to speak not just in draconic languages, but in the mathematical harmonies that controlled the crystal technology. They discovered how to shape matter with focused will to commune with the elemental forces of earth and fire and air. Most importantly, they learned the stories. Marcus, drawing on both human scientific knowledge and the ancient memories Seraphina shared with him, became the sanctuary's chronicler and teacher. He taught the young dragons about their heritage, about the great works their ancestors had accomplished, about the responsibilities that came with such incredible power. The first of the adult dragons arrived on the 67th day after the transformation. Thraxis the Ancient, a massive bronze dragon who had slept beneath the Himalayan peaks for 3 centuries, emerged from a thermal vent in the sanctuary's deepest level. His arrival was announced by harmonics that made the entire mountain ring like a bell. More followed over the following weeks. Skyweaver, whose silver scales have been legends among the Arctic peoples. Stormcaller, whose mastery of wind and lightning had inspired countless tales of tempests and hurricanes. Earthshaper, who had once carved entire river valleys with her claws. They came from every continent, the last survivors of a species that had once ruled the skies. Some arrived alone, while others brought treasures and knowledge they had preserved through centuries of hiding. All of them were amazed by what they found in the sanctuary. For the first time in 1,000 years, dragons could gather openly without fear of human interference. They could share their accumulated wisdom, plan for the future, and begin the slow work of rebuilding their civilization. But, perhaps most remarkably, they accepted Marcus's presence among them without question. His transformation had created something unprecedented, a human consciousness that could fully understand and communicate with dragon thought patterns. He became their bridge to understanding how the modern world worked, while they taught him secrets that predated human civilization. Under his guidance, the sanctuary developed technologies that blended ancient dragon magic with practical engineering principles. Crystal-powered systems that could manipulate matter at the molecular level. Transportation networks that use controlled thermal currents to move throughout the mountain complex. Communication arrays that could reach anywhere on Earth without relying on human satellite networks. But the greatest achievement was the nursery expansion project. Working together, the adult dragons and Marcus created optimal hatching conditions that would ensure the survival of future generations. New eggs began to appear as the adult dragons formed mating pairs and prepared to rebuild their population. The surface world, meanwhile, remained completely unaware of what was happening beneath their feet. Corva Mining's official reports described the mountain expedition as a failure, claiming that unstable geological conditions had made further excavation impossible. The company quietly shifted its operations to other sites, writing off the Drakmore Mountains as an expensive mistake. Webb and the few team members who had actually seen the dragons found themselves isolated and discredited. Their reports were dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations brought on by equipment malfunctions and gas leaks in the underground passages. Within a year, most of them had been quietly transferred to other positions or encouraged to seek employment elsewhere. The cover-up was so complete that the dragon discovery became nothing more than an urban legend among mining industry workers. Just another tall tale about strange things found in deep excavations. But Marcus, watching from his crystal throne in the sanctuary's heart, knew that the secret wouldn't remain safe forever. Human technology was advancing rapidly, and eventually someone would develop instruments sensitive enough to detect the dimensional displacement that hid the sanctuary. When that day came, the dragons would be ready. They were already planning for eventual contact with humanity, but on their own terms rather than as subjects for exploitation. The young dragons being raised in the sanctuary would be the first generation in millennia to grow up without fear, and their perspective on human-dragon relations would be very different from their ancestors. Some of them had even expressed interest in learning about human culture and technology, seeing potential for cooperation rather than conflict. Under Marcus's tutelage, they were developing ideas for how the two species might work together to address global challenges like climate change and resource depletion. But those possibilities lay in the future. For now, the sanctuary remained hidden and protected, a place where an ancient species could heal from centuries of persecution and prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. Marcus felt a deep satisfaction as he watched a group of young dragons practice their flying skills in one of the larger chambers. Their movements were still awkward and uncoordinated, but they were learning quickly. Soon they would be ready to explore the upper reaches of the sanctuary and, eventually, perhaps, the outside world itself. Serafina joined him on his crystal platform, her massive form settling beside his transformed consciousness with the ease of long familiarity. Through their bond, she shared images of the future she envisioned, dragons and humans working together, combining technological innovation with ancient wisdom to create something greater than either species could achieve alone. Is that really possible? Marcus asked, his voice resonating through the crystal formations around them. You are proof that it is possible, she replied, her thoughts warm with affection and hope. You gave up everything human to save us, and in doing so, you became something entirely new. If such transformation is possible for one, it may be possible for many. Marcus considered her words as he watched the young dragons play. They were so different from their ancestors, more open, more curious, less burdened by the weight of ancient grievances. Perhaps they really could build bridges where previous generations had only known conflict. The mountains sang around them, crystal formations humming with the power that kept their sanctuary hidden from the surface world. In the depths below, thermal vents carried energy up from the planet's core, ensuring that their refuge would endure for millennia to come. And in the chambers throughout the complex, dragon eggs glowed with inner fire, promising a future where the species that had once been humanity's greatest mystery might become its greatest ally. Marcus had been dumped into a dragon's lair by men who expected him to die. Instead, he had found a new life, a new purpose, and a new family among creatures from legend. His transformation from injured mechanic to guardian spirit was complete, but his story was just beginning. The dragons were coming home at last, and the world above would never be the same. In the years that followed, the sanctuary became a beacon of hope for magical creatures across the planet. Other endangered species found their way to the mountain's hidden passages. Phoenixes whose flames had been dimmed by pollution, unicorns driven from their forest homes by urban expansion, and countless other beings from the borderlands between myth and reality. Marcus welcomed them all, expanding the sanctuary to accommodate their needs and learning from their unique perspectives on the world. The mountain became not just a dragon refuge, but a preserve for all the ancient magics that humanity had forgotten or driven away. And sometimes, late at night, when the crystal song was at its most beautiful, he would remember his old life as a simple mechanic fixing broken machines. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent years repairing humanity's mechanical creations, only to discover that his true calling was to help heal the much older and more complex machinery of the natural world itself. He had been broken, discarded, left for dead in a dragon's lair. But sometimes the greatest transformations come from the most desperate circumstances, and sometimes what seems like an ending is really just a new beginning waiting to unfold. The mountain sang on, and Marcus sang with it, guardian and guide to all who sought sanctuary in the deep places of the earth where old magic still flourished and dragons remembered how to dream.